All right, listeners, I think you know that we are part of the Radiotopia network, which is basically a network built on the idea that you should support the most creative, independent audio makers around. No one, and I mean no one, embodies the Radiotopia ethos more than Benjamin Walker and his show Theory of Everything. Benjamin, who I've known for a long time, has been making beautiful, personal, sprawling audio documentaries for decades that help us understand the very strange world we live in. And now he has a new series called Not All Propaganda is Art. The new series goes back to the 1950s when Western security agencies like the CIA paid artists, writers, and intellectuals to fight the cultural Cold War.
The CIA funds were free. I mean, no one was told what to say.
Gloria Steinem, activist who sees the CIA as a sort of enlightened pal or rich uncle, there is another viewpoint.
Look, if you're listening to this show, I know you like secret histories. I know you like a mix of culture and politics and shadowy figures. So what are you waiting for? Not All Propaganda is Art from Benjamin Walker. You can find it now wherever you listen or at theoryofeverythingpodcast.com. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avercan. This day, July 31st, 2012, the presidential election is heating up. It is looking like it's going to be Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. And a reporter is trailing Mitt Romney on a trip to Poland and yells out, to my mind, the single greatest question in the history of political journalism. Yelled at Governor Romney, "What about your gaffes?" There it is, folks. It's a beautiful, beautiful statement. 4 words. Governor Romney, what about your gaffes? I want it printed on a T-shirt. I want it taught at the Columbia Journalism School. I've been waiting to do this episode, seriously, for a long, long time because I think it actually says so much, and I have so many thoughts about it and its place in political journalism and modern politics. So here we go, here to do this episode that I've been waiting for. Nicole Hemmer of Columbia and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
You should know, Jody, that the person who yelled out that question actually had it printed on a T-shirt that Mitt Romney later signed. So you're going to have to go get Philip Rucker's home address and go get it from him.
And you know, I did not put Philip Rucker, who is still out there as a political reporter, I did not put his name in the intro because I think that, like most things, this is not about individual actors. This is a systemic problem, and Philip Rucker was simply just sort of representing the larger problems and foibles of political journalism. Nonetheless, Philip Rucker, this has sort of, I'd say, part of his legacy, and every once in a while comes up from time to time, including he ribbed himself by putting it on a T-shirt. But to that point, and I have other thoughts about this, but to that point, one of the things that you see when you go back and watch the video of this or read accounts of this is it's one of these moments where Mitt Romney's sort of walking out of an event and people are lobbing questions at him. The 3 questions that get lobbed before "What about your gaffes?" and the 2 questions that get lobbed after "What about your gaffes?" are not that much better, right? They're all basically that. And Philip Rucker, to his credit, kind of found the purest, like, whatever the sort of densest material in the world distillation of those was.
The platonic idea of a gaffes question. Look, I mean, it had become the narrative around Mitt Romney. It was kind of the thing that the drum that journalists kept beating throughout this campaign. And suddenly you have these very serious moments, including Mitt Romney's trip to Europe, which was unusual for a candidate to do, to go over to Europe. It was something that Barack Obama had done. And, you know, it didn't always go that well. He ran into some problems while he was abroad, sometimes for what he said, sometimes for his policy positions. But instead of talking about things like foreign policy, instead of asking those kinds of questions, what you get instead are questions about these gaffes. And it's the word gaffes is so interesting, right? Because it means that you're talking about something that really is inconsequential, right? It's not a statement that he made that he meant. It's a gaffe. And so that idea of latching on to the shiny object, latching on to the thing that will go viral on Twitter, that becomes the mainstay of a lot of reporting during that campaign.
And it's bad because it's for all political candidates, it's the gotcha moment. Like they say something, they trip over a word, they misspeak, exaggerate, whatever it is, or just sort of speaking flippantly. And it's the, I gotcha, it's a problem. Or, it's a way of sort of blowing up an idea to explain who this person's real character is. It's kind of a low blow considering the fact that we all make gaffes or misspeak or say things that we don't necessarily mean. But when you're in the public realm, it gets really hard to navigate around these, and so politicians just choose to go mum and not say anything at all, as opposed to having to say something that they will regret.
And I actually think it's a real problem that we've inherited this definition of a gaffe, which is when a politician accidentally tells the truth. Yes. So that anytime a politician stumbles or says something they don't mean, instead of treating it as, oh, they accidentally said the wrong thing, or that's not actually what they meant to communicate, it's treated as, we finally gotten to the heart of this matter. We know what lies deep in this candidate's soul. And I think that's a real problem.
Yeah, and so that's one of the main things in this story that I think fascinates me, is that it really points out that I find that sort of idea, which I think is a mantra in political journalism, pretty insidious, and Michael Kinsey, who kind of coined that idea that a gaffe is when a politician accidentally tells the truth, right? He's a longtime political reporter. He coined that in the early 80s. There may have been a moment where that was sort of insight and that was interesting. But even Michael Kinsey by 2012 or so is kind of saying our thirst for gaffes, not just as things that will go viral, but also as the goal, right? The place where you're going to gain insight. Even Kinsey was sort of pointing out that this has become a real problem, as opposed to, if you want to find out what someone has to say or what they believe, like, maybe ask them that, right? And that just sort of completely disappears. And it's related a lot to the sort of political media environment in which, and I think Romney has, some culpability here too. He is very unavailable to the press. Modern politicians tend to be very unavailable to the press. And so you get these moments where the only times you get to ask a politician a question is when you're shouting it to them while they're, walking by. And so trying to find that one little phrase. And, I want to mention some of the other things that were yelled at Romney in that moment. But a CNN reporter yells, "Governor Romney, are you concerned about some of the mishaps on your trip?" The New York Times, "Governor Romney, do you have a statement for the Palestinians?" Okay, maybe that's, but what else? What's Romney going to do? Stop and turn and talk about Palestinians? And then Rucker comes in off the top rope with, "What about your gaffes?" And then the New York Times, another New York Times reporter says, "Governor Romney, do you feel that your gaffes have overshadowed your foreign trip?" And then CNN, "We have questions for you. You've only taken 3 questions from the trip from the press." So again, it's not just Rucker in this moment, and it's this feeding frenzy around gaffes. Do we want to say what Romney's gaffes, quote unquote, were in this moment, the things that he'd kind of done that had sort of set up this moment?
There were 2 big ones. And actually that question about Palestinians, which you said could be, a serious policy question, was actually about one of these gaffes, was about a statement that he made that said that things were better for the Israelis because of their culture. And that's also not a great statement. That does have policy implications, but it was focusing on that rather than his policy towards Israel and Palestine. But the big one that overshadowed everything was he landed in the UK, which was preparing for the 2012 Olympics. And Mitt Romney famously helped organize the Olympics in the United States in Salt Lake City. And he looks around and he's like, these guys don't look like they're ready for the Olympics at all. Britons did not take that particularly kindly. That did actually land on the pages of all of the tabloids in the UK during his visit.
He's had a lot of sort of zingers, I guess you could say, one-liners or one-offers. I mean, I think about the debates in which he's debating Obama, and he talks about the binders full of women. That became a whole thing. We've got women, we've got binders full of women. It's really, do you? It was just, it was, but to be fair, I guess I will counter this. I'm not trying to defend Romney, but I will say this. When Obama got caught saying a gaffe, there was a moment which he was giving a speech. He uses a poor choice of words, and he says if you've got a business, you didn't build that. And Fox News pounced on that line, and they played that if you've got a business, you didn't build it 81 times in 18 days. That's insane, but it's a way of harping on anything that you think will destroy someone's credibility or destroy someone's really ability to provide nuance and offer a full critique. And that's what gets played out over and over and over again. So Romney's trying to avoid that one-liner that will get played over and over and over again.
Right. You know what's interesting is there is this moment in the campaign when a secret recording leaks of Romney talking, I think, to some high-dollar donors, where he talks about there are 47% of Americans who don't have skin in the game. We're never going to be able to win them over because they're takers, not makers. That might not have been the language he used, but he did use that 47% line. And that, to my mind, is something that is more revelatory than a gaffe. That is something that he meant to say to an audience. He did not mean it to become public, but that is something where there are real policy implications, and that's worth spending some time on as a political reporter, I think, more so than some of the comments about the Olympics.
Can I just say, I remember voting for this election in Boston, in Dorchester, which is a largely Black community. And as we're walking into the voting booth, there's a Black man who's like, the 47% is here. The 47% is here to vote. And I was like, I mean,
man. But this, I'm so glad you two brought up those examples of you didn't build it and the 47%, because in many ways, those became the mantras of that election. And I think, to your point, Niki, were like really revelatory about two visions for how wealth gets created in this country, the role of government, and so forth. And so, my frustration, I have a two-step frustration with what About Your Gaffes reveals. But the first one is this, that like, even when someone is inelegant in stating something, if you look for the actual truth behind what they're saying, there is something there to probe, and there is something potentially revelatory. And so Barack Obama saying you didn't build that, he was actually saying, like, you're not alone in the wealth that you create. We have to think about the systems around you. We have to think about government. Like, that's what he was saying. But instead, you didn't build that got taken as a quote unquote gaffe. And Mitt Romney's like, there's a whole part of this country that those of us who earn wealth are sort of dragging along with us, and they're dragging us down. Like, that's what Mitt Romney believes, and that's a sort of policy position, and we should engage with that. And in this weird way, I actually think the election did sort of engage with that, even though it was so mired in those things. Like, I think people came to understand the difference between Obama and Romney really was largely along those lines. So I'm soapboxing here a little bit, but that is my first stage of like frustration with this. My second one, which is the one that I don't think people really talk about much with What About Your Gaffes, and is the place where I kind of find my most frustrations with political journalism, is there is a modern version of a question to a politician that is basically asking them to be a pundit about themselves. And I think that is the worst kind of political journalism, and it has only grown and grown and grown and grown. And this is the perfect example of that. It is not asking about the substance of your gaffes. It is asking, hey, your gaffes, be a pundit, riff on them. What's it doing to you? And look at the other questions that were around this, right? New York Times reporter, Governor Romney, do you feel that your gaffes have overshadowed your foreign trip? That is not a question for the person at the heart of the story. That's not a good question to begin with, but that's a question for the pundits around the person to do analysis of. But this thing that we do to politicians over and over, we ask them to be pundits to themselves. Yeah. And I mean, I know I'm going off here, but Trump kind of really hacked that, right? Yep. All he did was sort of riff and be a pundit and take a step back and not realize that, like, well, you're the one who wants to put his hand on the lever, but you're acting like you're just a guy on TV riffing about the political implications of all this. And so that, I think, is really at the heart of what's like kind of amazing and revealing about What About Your Gaffes.
Yeah. I totally agree. And I agree about the hacking, too. Like, there's nothing that Donald Trump loved more as president than to sit back and, like, handicap a race or talk about news coverage. As if somebody like Mitt Romney gets to control what overshadows what on his trip. You know who controls what takes up the most headlines? The people writing the headlines.
And it's easy. And it's just, like, at some basic level, easier for political reporters to ask a question that asks a politician to basically do their job for them, right? Yeah. Give me analysis on how you're doing, as opposed to actually asking them substantive questions and then having to do the hard work of analyzing that. And so I think there's like it's just the laziest form of journalism is basically what I'm trying to say.
Which is why. Can I talk about Rick Gorka?
Yes.
Yes.
While Jody gets down off his soapbox. Kellie, tell the story of your
frustration. I think some of the frustration that you have just discussed has been exemplified by some of that frustration. He is the traveling press secretary, and in response to a lot of these, superficial questions, he is responding to Mitt Romney being in Poland, and he basically says to the reporter, "Kiss my ass. This is a holy site for the Polish people. Show some respect." And so that line itself of sort of like, shove it or shut it or whatever he's saying to the reporters to just shut them down, that becomes a story, a one-liner, a gaffe, if you will, that he has to later apologize for using that language.
Well, I mean, if there's anything that a political journalist love to get up in arms about more than a gaffe, it's a breach of decorum.
Oh, right? Somebody swore.
And so this is perfect in that regard, that the one flows into the other, and you have them, and then Jim Acosta, right? Who I can't stand that guy, but anyway, Jim Acosta is like, this is inexcusable for Gorka to talk this way to us as the press, and it's like, well, you brought it down to this level. It's in some regards, and so I don't know.
I also love the juxtaposition of "kiss my ass, show some respect."
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's a great line. Great line.
Really
this is a holy site. No, but this is a holy site. Okay. Kiss my ass, show some respect. Brilliant. So, look, as we said, this becomes a thing. What about your gaffes becomes a thing too. And I think, 2012, like blogs like this, there's no early days of Twitter. So like, what about your gaffes is a nice thing that sort of goes into the ether. And, I think Rucker takes it a little, self-effacing about it, puts on that T-shirt. Other people sort of recognize this moment for what it is. Alex Perroni, a really great reporter, just writes kind of like, this may be the dumbest question I've ever heard. It is a perfect, beautiful little 2012 campaign Zen koan that should be buried in a time capsule that is never, ever dug up. It should be translated into Latin and made America's new motto. And Dave Weigel, who used to write for Slate and now writes, I think, for the Washington Post as well. But, he kind of like celebrates What About Your Gaffes Day every year and sort of marks it. So, yes, I mean, it is still out there. But any other thoughts on this? I feel like I've said my piece.
Jody's putting a cool towel around his neck and leaning back. Yeah. All right, you guys, I'm good.
I appreciate the frustration. I really do.
Yeah. It's this funny thing where it frustrates me. It taps into all the things I find frustrating. It is also, I agree with Alex Perroni, it is a perfect little collection of words. So I guess at some level, Philip Rucker deserves praise for that. All right. That brings us to the end of the episode. Nicole Hammer, thanks to you.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Romney!
Some of the mishaps on your trip.
Governor Romney, do you have a statement for the Palestinians?
What about your gaffes?
Governor Romney, do you feel that your gaffes have overshadowed your foreign trip?
Holy site for the Polish people. Show some respect.
Governor Romney, just
show some respect.
We haven't had another chance to ask him questions.
This is a holy site for the Polish people. Show some respect.
Radiotopia.